this talks a little bit of a mix of things, a little bit of Babylon Health. I've only been there a couple months, a little bit of my time with Moo and Blurb before that. So I want to start with telling a story or perhaps a myth that was told to me by the head of analytics at Moo. So in World War II, only about 50% of the planes that went out to war came back alive and survived. And that's a terrible ratio, right? Can you imagine getting on this plane as a pilot and knowing there's only a 50% chance you're coming back? So they said, all right, we got to fix this. So they put the best scientists and researchers on it. They started to look at all the different planes that came back and started to look for patterns. And they started to see a pattern, which is great. They started to see, look, all the planes that come back have bullet holes in the same area. The tail, the centerpiece, and the wings. The tail, the centerpiece, and the wings was a great breakthrough to say, okay, we know where we should put our armor, because we can't put extra armor everywhere. It makes the planes too heavy. Right? So they start going down this path. Thankfully, there was a statistician by the name of Abraham Wald, and he actually said, look, hang on for a second, everybody. You're missing a big part of the data. You're only looking at the planes that have survived. In actuality, this is where the planes can take damage and survive. What you really should put the armor is where the bullet holes are not, right? Because that's the places where the planes will get hit and they'll fail, right? So this is an example of something called survivorship bias that happens every day to us around the world of humans. So when we concentrate on the people or things that make it past some selection process and overlook those that do not. So you may see this, you're walking down the street someplace, and you're like, wow, that old car from the 50s, gosh, they just don't make them like they used to. Actually, they probably do make them like they used to. What you don't see is the 99% of those cars that are on a trash heap somewhere, right? So mentally, we think in that way. So why do we invest so much in this kind of data, right? The wrong data to think about. Being data-driven, right, is one of the core competencies to product and design and modern design in doing our jobs. However, it's highly biased and most critical, likely taking our focus away from where true insights and massive growth may lie. So let's think about how this might apply to our own world, right? So we think about the website world and many come in e-commerce. We think about bounce rate, right? So bounce rate is what's the percentage of people who come, land on one page of my site, throw up, and leave, right? So an average bounce rate in the world is around 45%, right? So 45% come and bounce away. If we look at mobile, this goes up to 65% of people come, bounce, go away. If you think about mobile apps, only around 25% of people use an app more than once, right? So imagine that these people that you're looking at data in Mixpanel and Apps Annie and things like that, you're really only looking at that 25% of people that open it more than once, let alone the people that come back for 7 days later. If you get to e-commerce conversion rate, so the people that come and actually buy something, that goes down to around a 3% conversion rate. And on mobile, that's around 1.5% conversion rate, right? So think about the 98.5% that are non-survivors, right, and non-customers. And then think about where we invest most of our information, most of our time and BI in most organizations. 100%, if 95, if not more, is spent entirely in understanding these 5 or 6 dots here, right? All the information we need to make decisions usually exist within that data of the customers. So we're often blind also to why these non-customers fail, right? Yet breakthrough products can come from understanding the potential customers who never show up in our dashboards or models. So why do we not focus as much on non-customers? Well, it's expensive, actually. It's expensive, it's time-consuming, could be risky, can be resource-intensive, right? It's inconvenient, right? A customer list can, and if you want to send out a survey, a customer list, you can pull it in the morning, send out a survey, have information 3 or 4 days later, potentially around that, right? Its customers are easier, right? We have that list. And also, we're a fairly business-driven culture, business case-driven culture, right? Meaning the executives come from backgrounds in operations and marketing, even technology, where hard data sings, right? So they're looking for that hard data to make decisions, right? So let's think about this a little more. What are other reasons we think this way? Well, we tend to look at the data we could collect, not the data we need. We have Google Analytics, we have Tableau, we have our data lake or data warehouse, more data that we can usually even process in many instances. And we assume the data we can collect can answer all our questions, right? So say conversion is up or average order value is down. if I just get the right reports and get the right analyst and we look hard enough and move this segment and add this segment and twist it the other way, there must be an answer there. But that isn't necessarily always the case, right? If you think about your own business and think about this from a product point of view and a UX point of view, how often are new KPIs created, right, or key performance indicators, or even we're working on OKRs, right? Many of these indicators were defined years ago, right? And they're measured and practiced, and how often do we come up with new ways to measure outcomes? Not very often, because that would mean having to think about the data to collect that we don't have yet. So here's an example, a little more in the realm of Babylon Health, as we work in AI a bit more, in AI and machine learning. So back in 2013, a handful of researchers at Google set loose a neural network on a corpus of 3 million words taken from Google News texts. The goal was to look for patterns and ways words appear next to each other. So if you say, king is to man as queen is to woman, Paris is to France as London is to England, these word mappings become extremely, extremely important. Right? This data set was called word2vec. It's extremely powerful and used globally for machine translation, web search results. It's a data set that many, many people use and impacts our world on a daily basis. A problem is, that came out in 2016, so a couple years after this was made, it's blatantly sexist. So you may say Paris is to France as Tokyo is to Japan, right? If you ask the database for what his father is to doctor, his mother is to what, it will say nurse, right? If you say, what's missing from the slide here at the bottom, if you say computer scientist to man, right, as woman is to homemaker. Right? So that inherent bias was based in this data, right? Because it wasn't necessarily looking at, we're starting with the data and we're building our models around that. Right? Since then, this has been fixed. They've went in and tried to twist the model a little bit to get rid of this bias. But as we go into the world and we think about what data we're using, remember the bias that is inherent within it. Data is really loud, right? So back in 2005, I co-founded a company called Blurb, which is a self-publishing kind of photo book company. When you start a new company, and many of you have maybe been part of startups, you don't have any data, right? You can maybe look at the competitor, but really have to go out there. You have to talk with customers, potential non-customers, because everyone's your non-customers, and build a really rich meaning, right? What are their problems? What are their needs? How are we building our product around those needs? You need to solve their problems. But then around a year and a half later, we launched and had some success, and actually the data starts flowing, right? As a company grows and the data flows, we fall into the trap of the crisp precision of the spreadsheet. This false precision can be mistaken for reality at times, right? And it's human nature to look at that clean data, right? So every morning you come in, there's an email with a Tableau report, a research report. I can look at my dashboard, I can see how everything's going. It's really loud, right? It's in your face, right? That quiet data, that context-rich data collected from people requires much more work to find in this loud room that we live in. We model what we can, we model what we know, and business cases tend to illustrate growth based on historical metrics. So I've been positioned now where I'm trying to balance a product management role as well as leading UX role. That means I have to sit in a lot of damn meetings around roadmap planning and product gateways and prioritization meetings. And there's always a discussion about business cases. Let's compare these two business cases and ROI on each one. So it can be trusted, that data, and usually modeling is based on historical data. Hey, we launched this product 2 years ago, we saw this amount of growth. If we just launched this type of product again, increased conversion 3%, here's 500K, that looks like a good option. On the other side, you may have something entirely brand new, right? Hey, we've never done this before, it's a new market, there's a lot of risk, we don't have data to back it up. That's where innovation may happen, but in limited resources, which ones of these are gonna get signed off on? It probably tends to be the one with lower risk, higher probability of success, and so these other aspects are lost, even though massive growth may be in that other data that's not in front of us. It's easy to confuse information with evidence. Right? What we really need to do is measure outcomes, and this is hard, and I think we talk a lot about how do we measure true outcomes because we have tons of facts at our fingertips. Again, GA, Tableau right there. But if we think about it, is really the number of Twitter followers someone has a measure of influence? Is increased conversion, do we increase conversion sometime without realizing what the impact is on retention, right? These things are tied together. And LinkedIn, should LinkedIn really be modeling their success on the number of people that post job descriptions or the number of people hired, or whether that person is still in their job and happy a year from getting that job, right? That gets really hard. And think about healthcare then. Now it's even harder, right? Because at the end of the day, we want health outcomes, right? And sometimes that can be a multi-stage, very complex service design process, taking over the case of many, many years. How do we measure, how do we go from someone registering and meeting with a doctor 1 or 2 times to actually long-term health and outcomes? They're really hard to measure. So a fact is not necessarily an insight. And true insights bring several facts together in the broader context of our business and user experience, and insights hopefully drive decision making. And again, that takes lots more work than just getting a number. It's combining those things together. So you may have seen this before, Tom Holden's description of desire paths. Basically, if you think of this, it's a big park. I think it's maybe in Brazil, and it shows, hey, here's where the designers put the sidewalks in, and here's where actually people walk. Right? So in the sense, what it's saying is our customers' world is not structured the same way our data is. Right? And you can see this as well as when we think about Conway's law. So Conway was a computer scientist, and he talked about how designs tend to reflect the organization of a business. You see this in websites all the time, right? Where the tabs at the top represent exactly the organizations within the business, not the user journey. Right? And this happens a lot even with data. Right? Your data that you get tends to be a reflection of your organizational model. There's sales data, there's operations data, there's product analytics data. It's not really how the customer uses your product or sees the world. So we need to remember that over time. We also fall under the delusion of a single explanation. Right? If, say, we're looking at conversion and conversion is down, again, there must be something in that data I can find to say something changed here, and therefore that is impacted by that single use. But this feature launched in conversion increase, we got it. But actually we recognize, I think and many people in this room coming from a UX background would recognize that people are messy, right? Like even if you take something like buying a plane ticket, right? There's a lot that happens with my spouse, with my family, looking at the calendar, looking at what else is going on in life, before I actually get to that website and try to book a ticket. Right? Same thing happens with healthcare, right? Actually getting and having 10 minutes on the phone with Babylon Health is one 10-minute aspect of your entire health life cycle, right? There's lots that go into that to make a really complex piece. It's really, really hard to represent in simplified data. And again, I think a little bit preaching to the crowd here, there is a bit of an inherent distrust of qualitative data. So somehow in our quest for confidence, qualitative knowledge ended up being positioned as the opposite of quantitative knowledge. Indy Young, who wrote the book on mental models, said, we've heard the word fluffy associated with qualitative knowledge. If quant research is seen as producing reliable, inconvertible facts, then qual research is seen as the opposite, the soft, made-up, inapplicable knowledge. Now, we know that's not true, right? UX and user research answers the why, right? We know true insights come from the balance of this, right? But quant being better is deeply embedded in our culture, and this does limit us. So agree or not with the points prior, I think probably most in the room giving a UX background do. We can agree that a good chunk of our potential growth is not captured in our data-driven approach to product. Okay, how can we do this? How can we do this better? Right. Let's talk about a few tactics. So, it's blunt. By the end of the day, it costs money to do this sometimes. And what it means is, if you're positioning yourself we're coming up to 2019, we think about, hey, we need to test this funnel and optimize the funnel. We need to think about the opportunities that are left out by not budgeting for this, right? If I need to do even surveys and research in a database of people I don't have, that's going to cost some money. So we need to think about this up front and make an argument for it. And hopefully some of these arguments here, even some of the first slides showing how 97% of the people we aren't capturing is one way to do that. But think about it as you work on your UX team, as well as with the product team. Or you can ask a frenemy, which sometimes tends to be in marketing. And the reason marketing can be your best friend in looking for non-customer insights is they tend to have money, right? They tend to have a big budget, and they do things like brand trackers and focus groups and surveys and pieces like this. But what's great is they have access to that. And I'll tell you what, some of the biggest insights I've had when we first joined Moo was just adding a series of a couple questions to their brand tracker, which goes out and surveys thousands and thousands of non-customers to start to get insights. And building that collectively with marketing became a really, really powerful tool for talking about how we gain more customers. And marketing, that's their job really, right? How do we grow the funnel and gain more market share so they can really be a partner in this conversation? If you don't know where to start, right, one place to start is to think about soon-to-be non-customers. So these are people that minimally use your product or current offering while they search for something better. This comes from a book called Blue Ocean Strategy, and there can be whole talks about this in general. But if you have your market you're working on, you then have soon-to-be non-customers who are kind of just waiting to jump ship. As soon as an opportunity presents themselves, there's an ocean of untapped demand there. You then have people that consciously don't want to use it and even farther out market distance from ours. But if you think about and talk to people and say, what's the most common alternative to your product, right? Who is using your competitor, right? To go out and watch people use your competitors and see what they value in that competitor and why they aren't using you, because there's a little bit closer to your market. They're actually in there, but they're looking for something better to come along. The thing to remember, though, is they're really likely unengaged, right? These aren't the people coming in for user research. They aren't the people answering surveys, right? You kind of have to search for them to find those people who maybe used you once and never came back. They're quiet within that single amount of data, but they can be super powerful because they're already kind of on the edge of ready to leave you or not. So an example. So this is from the JAM conference, product management conference. Maybe this was a year ago, I think. And we were going there, and my friend Mark got this piece. At the bottom, it says, easily connect with people on the day. And remember, this is the time when I was working at Moo. Moo's a print company, much known for building their own business cards. And of course, this pops in. We can all agree business cards suck. So there's a soon-to-be non-customer, right? So a place like Moo, that's really important, right? I mean, they've grown a hugely successful business around print and business cards, but there's a lot of people out there who don't use it anymore, right? Or use it in a very different way than they did. So it's important for the business to succeed to understand those soon-to-be non-customers and how that translates and what they're replacing it with. Right? Many of you are probably familiar with, I was just talking to someone earlier that does remote research, right? Using web and web intercepts and app intercepts can be a big win at this, because what you're doing is people are on your site, but it's much, much earlier in the funnel, right? You're getting at those 97% of people who don't convert, or potentially the 45% of bounce. Basically, a thing like Ethnio, there's a couple of those. When you come to your website or app, it launches a little dialogue. I know we hate dialogues, but it has a purpose for good, right? It basically starts to collect information from you, right? And then in real time, you're getting this. And you can actually call the people while they're still on your website or still in your app and get a sense of why are they there? What are they trying to do? How is it not fulfilling their need? And so you're trying to get at some of these people earlier in the funnel. And again, it's a fairly affordable way to get some of these insights around those people that are soon to potentially be non-customers, right? So it's simple for this. I mean, I think when I talk to product people or marketing people, this is more important, right? One customer is 100% better than none. One non-customer is 100% better than none, to paraphrase Steve Krug, right? You just need to do it, right? We know qualitative feedback doesn't have to be hard. In fact, non-customers are all around you, right? There's far more non-customers in the world than customers. If you're in a product, you have a product today, I imagine the person you meet today, the person sitting next to you, may be a non-customer. Okay, why? Ask them these questions. Ask them why they aren't using it. What are they using today? What are their competitors? How are they using it? It's quite easy. And I tell people not to leave their non-customers just to your UX research or even marketing teams, right? You can enable everyone in your company to go out and find 3 non-customers, ask them 3 questions, and bring that information back to you, right? So there's simple ways to try to get at these insights. And by doing that, you'll get people much more involved in understanding non-customers as a key piece of your business. And to follow up a little bit what Steph, I think, presented on earlier, jobs to be done can be one way to also get at that, especially working with teams, right? Because it forces you to ask the question not of how do we organize our products. Products are what we have data on, right? So again, Moo has tons of data on business cards and identity collateral. It also then has the demographic view, right? We can say, look, creative professionals are an important market. We can look at creative professionals. We can segment our data in SMBs and enterprise, or insert whatever vertical marketing path you have there. When you get to the jobs to be done view, all of a sudden if you're thinking about business cards or print, you're thinking about, I want to acquire a lead if I'm a salesperson. I want to stand out. I want to impress potential clients. I want to look bigger than I am. And probably the most important job they're hiring that product to do is to survive my first year in business. Right? So surviving your first year in business is a very, very different relationship with a customer or a non-customer than trying to sell them business cards, right? It helps you expand that view, and you realize you have to talk to many more people to get there. And this gets at that final piece, right? I think in the world we know that it's important to our business to understand quant data as well as qual data. And I think we're part of these evangelists to get it done. Understanding that quant data is important to the success of our businesses, bringing that together with qual and especially non-customer data is really the stories we want to tell each other in our business. So to revisit the myth, actually it's hard to find any solid data. Wald recommendations, though, were quickly put into effect and were still being used by the Navy and the Air Force through the wars in Korea and Vietnam. So the finding helped to potentially turn the tide of war, right? We're also blind to why non-customers fail, that breakthrough products can come from understanding those customers who never show up in our dashboards or models. So to finish, I want to quote Dave McRaney, who said, "We must remind ourselves that when you start to pick apart the winners from the losers, successes and failures of living and the dead, that by paying attention to one side of the equation, you are always neglecting the other." Thank you. And we're hiring lots of people, so come back to me. Cool. Do we take questions now? What do we do? Hang out. Yes?
What would you have as key questions for non-customers?
What would I have for key questions for non-customers? Well, I think one of the key questions that we kind of start out with is just asking them, again, a little bit what Steph talked about with Jobs Be Done, right? Is like, when you think about your context in the world, what are you, two things. One, what are they trying to hire your product to do, right, to incite this? And also a key thing is what other products do they use? What are competitors they use to kind of get at that? And that'll help you dive in a bit to understand their world a bit more. And really you can say, hey, have you heard of my company? If not, fine. Have you heard of these other companies? If not, fine. What companies do you use to do this job to be done, right? So I would say for Babylon Health, what currently you do when you have when your child's sick at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, right? What do you do in that situation? What do you do when you wake up and you've had a headache for a couple days? Or for Moo, you can kind of say, hey, did you use business cards in the past? Why don't you use them anymore? And that usually starts just a listening conversation that actually takes you in pretty interesting realms. Okay?
We have plenty of time for questions. We've got another 5 minutes, so please feel free to carry on the conversation for the next, few minutes. And if not, we can roll on.
Anyone else have any questions? Comments? Yes?
In a lot of industry, there are a lot of sensors that are collecting a lot of data. Take airplanes.
Yeah.
We look at the amount of data they produce.
Yeah.
How do you actually move a business to concentrating to the right data when you have such amount of data?
Yeah, that gets at that loud. It's when there's so much data and it's so loud. I think to your point, that's where I think qual becomes quite powerful if you can mix those pieces together. In some ways, it's just making that argument to say that we're really missing out on a big chunk of that information, right? I think in the sense there's always going to be people looking at that massive amounts of data. It's really just asking the right questions and just devoting a small amount of time to doing that. Right. I mean, in the sense, it's kind of a simple insight, right? There's nothing breakthrough here. I think it's just understanding that we live in a world of lots and lots of loud data, and it draws our focus in. But every now and then, we just need to look externally from that amount of data and give ourselves, I guess, the freedom to really ask those questions, because it is. I mean, even in my role, what's happening with the App Store reviews, right? How's this conversion funnel going on, right? It's hard to even take the time to get out there and meet with customers sometimes anymore, let alone non-customers. So it's just doing it in some ways. Yes.
So, as an example, you've got lots of data, but when you analyse how the data was gathered, you realise that some of these questions are potentially leading in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
You've got experience of dealing with that when that data is defined as gold.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, every now and then you remind people that at some point, a human, right, made a choice of what data to collect, right? And in you get some interesting conversations of doing a bit of data archaeology, you could say, right? Like, hey, what is this KPI? How do we define it, and why was this important? And what you see, especially with companies that have been around 3 or 4 years or even longer, you realize, oh, Bruce decided to come up with this, and it was measured this certain way kind of in the past. And if you kind of get into the 5 whys, you know, why and why and why, sometimes that helps kind of ask that question. And also just reminding people that, you know, there are human decisions that went into what data we collect and how we collect it. And sometimes we don't take the time to question that as much. The other aspect of sometimes is also just, you know, I've found in general doing user journey mapping, right? Usually when you do that, you tend to have, hey, they come to the website and they buy something, right? If you start expanding that out and kind of take that into what happened actually before they came to the website, right? And what happened to all those people who actually never came to the website or came to the app? It starts asking those questions about, hey, how do we get at this data? We actually don't have that data represented in that path. But again, data is a really powerful, like I said, it's a really powerful piece, especially when it comes to business cases and signing. So from a financial way, what we've tried to do this sometimes at companies is say, look, 80% of our budget's going to go towards things that we feel confident in, meaning we can base a budget around releasing these products and we feel confident in meeting those budgetary goals. But then let's not sandbag, right? Let's be real. Let's take another 20% of this budget and focus not only on innovation, right, but focus on really understanding non-customers and know that the risk is higher there, right? So you never put any big bets on those products that are going to serve the non-customers. You have high confidence in the products and user experiences you have the data and background to solve, but it doesn't use up 100% of your investment sometimes. Yes?
Do you have any experience like using analytics to like tag customers on non-customers? It's pretty easy to do ultimately, isn't it? You can see where they finished the journey and when they didn't. And have you ever found that particularly useful?
Yeah. So on websites, especially or in apps as well, you know, basically you'll have, hey, this person has converted or they haven't, right? And so therefore you have that non-customer segment that has been to your website. The challenge you get then is like they probably only come once, right? So the data you have on them may be quite small. If you have, you know, there is a bit of gold though in those people that maybe come back 2 or 3 times and you see them engaging with you more than once. Getting at them and trying to understand them, right? And like even that aspect of using things like the intercepts is a way to do that, right? So in some ways, it's just having that segment, to your point, even in the data you have of people who have been and engaged with you just a few amount of times but actually haven't converted, and looking at that and then comparing what do they do and where they go compared to the people who do convert, can usually get some pretty interesting insights about where people are popping out and leaving the app. Anything else? Yes?
Can you actually see the audience at all from the stage, though?
I don't know. I think most people would say you probably never have enough data. It's hard. It's a hard question because I think there is a challenge in that we tend to overanalyze things, right? And there is a thinking that will actually get to a right answer, right? My gut, in general, I think the best thing to say is just enough data to feel like you have, data needs to be tied to your level of confidence in your decision, right? You're never going to have 100% confidence, especially in the world we work in. And you just say, hey, this data's informed our decision, but it's still a bet, right? And so how we talk about it when we're doing product decisions sometimes is, I always tell product managers that if you're going to have a date, you need to have a confidence number with that, right? So we can say, look, here's our insight from this. Our confidence really is only a 4, right? Because this is the data we have, but it's better than nothing, right? I think we do fall into this realm a little bit of, especially when you get into analytics, and data science isn't necessarily my world, but you know, like 95% confidence and 99% confidence, these come from medical worlds, right? Where it really matters that you have that level of confidence. It doesn't come from like a button, a CTI on a homepage, right? So every now and then it's reminding ourselves that the level of confidence we need to directionally go in one direction is maybe okay to make a decision and go, because again, an early decision that we can learn from is maybe better than waiting another 6 weeks or 8 weeks until we get the right data. And that's usually the discussion we have. It's like, okay, is it good enough to make a decision and the risk is low enough versus, again, spending lots and lots of time. And I've seen lots, even myself, you get caught so much in over analyzing things, and then sometimes you never really come up with a sufficient answer, even though you spend lots of time on it.
Okay, that's brilliant. Round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Once again, I wanted to say a personal thank you for stepping in about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, wasn't it? So fantastic. Thanks for coming in. Next up, we've got Claire Draycott from News UK. Claire, are you about? So brilliant. Yeah, we'll be having another 5-minute break, wiring everybody up, and back to the talks in 5 minutes.